and the Islamic State is the beneficiary of this.
I would say too, this is one point where Africa is far and away more progressive than the Middle East, which is the African Union, right? As far as regional arrangements, the Middle East has no effective regional arrangements, what Professor Hess is talking about, to deal with trans-border problems. Now, I would say also that, there's an aspect of globalization here that activates local grievances in the service of transnational causes. And here's what I mean. This guy you talked about, the Egyptian police officer, he had local grievances. I mean local and national grievances. Problems with the government, corruption, political cronyism, all these things that are common and obvious and have been well studied in the region. That cross borders within different countries. And those of you guys taking my political economy in Middle East and North Africa, that's a nice plug. Next time I teach it, know about this to some extent, and we get into it more. But the problem was that, this ISIS is very, very smooth when it comes to social media. The other day, the U.S. government has a Twitter feed called Think, Turn Away. And it's their attempt to show all of these atrocities and bad things that ISIS is doing, to try to convince people in the region that this is a bad group, they're not really Muslims, they're bad people, stay away from them. Well, accidentally on that Twitter feed, they posted a picture of a Syrian army martyr. And immediately, 10 ISIS guys screenshotted it and tweeted it and said, oh, look, the U.S. slipped up. There's their true allegiance. They love Assad. What's that going to do? Of course that's going to gain a lot of more recruits who have seen Assad kill over 200,000, or at least the regime and maybe some of the rebels combined, kill over 200,000 people in Syria over the last 3 years. Right? Very, very smooth, right? So they're activating. They're saying, well, come to us, come to the Islamic State. We're gonna provide for you an environment where it's not going to be politically corrupt, where we're going to rule according to a pure, and of course then they are using a lot of Islamic language in this too. So, I think that's a big factor, kind of the skilled use of globalized communication, and and knowing their audience, right? I mean, these guys really know their audience well. They combine rhetoric that's taken straight out of Quran and Hadith, and they combine it with various current events that were widely publicized in the Middle East negatively. In other words, some event happens where a group of people in Yemen get killed in a U.S. drone strike, and it turns out it's a wedding and it's a family and it has nothing to do with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And they publicize that, and they say, look, it's the U.S. war on Islam. Right? So there's this very shrewd combination, and I think it's a little bit cynical, but it's working.
You're talking about people that there's literally people that are upset about housing arrangements in France and the high unemployment rates in France that compels them to get on a plane to Turkey, cross the border, and join the Islamic State. Right? That shows you the power of protest or social movements. Is that it makes logical sense for tens of thousands of people to link the grievances that they experience in some Western European country or somewhere else in the world to this to what's going on in the Middle East, and seeing the Islamic State as the solution for the kinds of grievances that they have and the struggles that they have in their individual life. So that shows you kind of they forge this perceived pathway where those two things are logically related. And it sounds crazy to most of us, but for the people involved, it's crystal clear, and that shows you how much reality can be shaped by these images and their effective arrangement and effective messaging. So there's probably somebody right now who's selling everything that they own in Britain or France or Netherlands and saying, I'm getting a plane ticket, I'm going over, and I'm going to fix what's wrong with the world by doing this.
It is the same process that made some divorcee from Ohio hop a plane and fly over to join the Kurds. fight against ISIS. It's the same process, it's just a different cause. He felt solidarity with these rebels fighting against innumerable enemies that were much more powerful, and he kind of affiliated himself somehow with that as a, I said Ohio, because Professor West is originally from Ohio. Anyway, subtle dig, but anyhow, yeah, it's, there is that kind of, there's a process, there's some processes at work here. It's not just haphazard.
Yeah, so I've gotta end it here and go torture my students a little bit, but
Do we want to?
do you want to continue on?
Well, I can go for about 10 more minutes, and then I have a class that we need to go finish, but I can go until 7:15.
One more question.
Yeah, okay, well, one on the back and
Waving around.
waving for a long time, so.
Oh, yeah, well, thank you for this fruitful, actually, feedback. My name is Juan. I'm Syrian. Been here for 3 years. My question is, I'm sorry, Dr. Hess, but probably you can help it. It's somehow addressed to Dr. Ray. So you just said that it's Assad the problem, and that's why, the rebels are there, and then they evolve to be ISIL. So if we discuss the root of the cause of the problem, so it's Assad against, doing all this kind of oppress against the people. So why now Assad is a problem, and now the West is calling for, for taking him down? Is it because now ISIL is calling for khilafah or khilafat, as we say it in English? Or is it because Nusra Front was there? Like 2 years ago, remember with the panel with Dr. Azdi, Nusra Front was there. So what is the, what was the radical change that happened? So where, now everyone, European Union, United States, they want to, airstrike, while a year ago there was a vote in the Senate to have attack against Assad himself in Damascus, but then it was rejected, and now we see airstrikes against ISIL, and now they want Assad. I don't know if Dr. Hess has something about it, but what changed it? Because from my perspective, the ideology is still the same. All what happened is, just the call for a khilafat. We have a khilafat now, like people are calling for no borders. It's not really ideology, I think, problem.
Do you want to say something first?
Oh, go ahead.
All right, so, okay, there is something big that happened. All right, what happened was that they erased the border between Syria and Iraq and captured a bunch of cities in Iraq, right? I mean, when I talked about this 2 years ago, I gave a talk, or a year and a half ago, I mentioned Jabhat al-Nusra, this group that's affiliated with Al-Qaeda in Syria. I mentioned the Kurds, if you guys were there, remember, and their fight against the Islamic groups. I didn't mention ISIS because ISIS, IS, Islamic State, didn't exist. That's just a name they gave themselves. It's basically the same group renaming itself. But what happened was that they gained real power, right? When these various Islamic and non-Islamic militias were fighting against Assad, and it was contained within his borders, then the U.S. and its allies looked at it and said, well, that's an Assad problem. If he loses, good, we don't like him. If he wins, well, that's okay, because at least he'll provide stability to the region, the borders with Israel. But once the Islamic State conquered a massive portion of territory in June and July and held on to it and seemed to continue to threaten Baghdad and other cities. It's really the Iraq factor is what made more interest in being involved. But I don't entirely agree with your statement about the U.S. calling for Assad's downfall. I mean, Obama said Assad will never regain legitimacy. He has lost it forever. But he didn't say our government policy is to get rid of Assad. I mean, it's, obviously they're related. But the first target, at least the U.S. administration's first target stated has been ISIS, not Assad. So ironically now Assad is benefiting from that because they're attacking ISIS and sometimes Jabhat al-Nusra, and then at the same time in the last few weeks Assad has ramped up his own attacks on other rebel positions. It's kind of like, oh, you take care of some of my problem, and that allows me a better opportunity to take care of the rest. So it's not inconceivable that that Assad could remain in power. Now, of course, the U.S. said they were going to arm these, what they called moderate rebels. But I have major reservations about that entire strategy, because the more that I study these rebels, and look at the names that they use for their groups, the majority of the rebel groups, of which there are some people estimate 10,000 different groups in Syria and Iraq combined. But the majority of the names that they use for themselves are Islamic names, Islamic terminology. Now, does that mean I think that Islam can't coexist with democratic systems? No, I don't think that. I teach another course on that here, that a lot of you have taken. But I think that the type of language, the sectarian nature of the language of the naming and the rhetoric of these rebel groups, and their stated goal is still to get rid of Assad. And Obama's saying, I want to train these same groups, these moderates, to get rid of ISIS. What leverage does the U.S. have after 3 years of ignoring these rebels, as you said, not helping them, even when Assad used chemical weapons? What leverage does the U.S. now have to come and say, hey guys, go and fight for us, be our armed branch, because we don't want to send Americans into Syria or Iraq, so you guys go and do the fighting, we'll give you the weapons. What kind of leverage does the U.S. actually have in that situation? I would say, not a lot. So I think the strategy is ill-conceived in general, and also for the same reason Professor Hess said regarding regional differences in competitions, very difficult to implement effectively.
Yeah, there's not a lot of will to go after Assad at all. There's allies that are screaming at the United States to go after Assad. Turkey, Erdogan says, I'll participate, but the end product has to be Assad is gone. And the U.S. says no, right? We'll figure out other ways to get engaged without Turkey's involvement. The Gulf states really want Assad gone. To the point that they're arming some of these questionable groups on the other side. Even Obama literally drew a red line, right? If he uses chemical weapons, we're going in. And then he did. And then we looked for escape routes, which the Russians were clever enough to provide, right? Sergei Lavrov, the smartest guy in town probably. But anyway, we were given an escape valve and we took it, and the U.S. is, when the U.S. sends in drones, that's like a commitment to do nothing, right? That's like, when you don't know what to get for dinner, you just get pizza. So drones are like pizza. It's just like, it's cheap, it's easy. It makes you feel good, but it doesn't really do much for you, right? There's no nutrition, there's no change.
That's your takeaway from this talk.
Sanctions are like pizza, but now it's drones are like pizza. Just, we'll get them from the air. And really it's nonsense. And I'm sure people are saying that.
The only time the drones have been effective, the only time was in Kobani, when you had people on the ground that knew the town, and they were literally giving the Americans the coordinates. Oh, bomb this street, and that's where ISIS is. Bomb this building, that's where they are. That's the only time where it's been effective. How many reliable partners do we have on the ground from a military perspective that are able to do that? Only the Kurds, who are generally not liked by the other populations in the region. So they're good for their territory, but outside of it, you have a problem. So I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. And we can go on all night. I mean, obviously, it is a huge topic, but hopefully that at least gave you a fair idea of some of what's happening with the Islamic State itself. And we didn't provide any solutions because, frankly, they don't have any.